Our globalist today is no ordinary Englishman in Seoul. Ever since he landed in Korea more than 20 years ago, Daniel Tudor has been an acute observer of the Korean people. As a correspondent for the British magazine The Economist, a writer of books about Korea and Koreans, and now an author of a historical novel about the last prince of Korea's Joseon Dynasty. Daniel joins us today to share his insights about what makes Koreans tick and why he got interested in one of the most turbulent times of Korea's history. So Daniel, welcome to The Globalist.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So let's start with your book. So I hear that it was first published in Korea. Did you write it in Korean? Why in Korean first?
I wrote it in English. I got a translator to translate it. And then my wife and I went through, so she's Korean, so we went through everything line by line.
Yeah. So that you felt comfortable with
So I read through it.
translation.
I don't like this, I don't like that, or this isn't quite what I meant. And then my wife and I would sit down and say, okay, what I really want to say is blah, blah, blah. How do I express that in a more natural or attractive way? And then she would suggest something, and then we would, So that was a very involved translation process.
That's a very much of a collaboration process. How long did that take?
So the translation part took about 3 months, I would say. Wow. And so then I had an English manuscript I was happy with and a Korean manuscript I was happy with. So I started trying to get a deal somewhere. Now, Korea, it happened fairly quickly. The English one, for Western market, you need to find an agent first. So that is inevitably barrier or something that makes the process longer and more difficult. So it's a bit longer and harder. So hopefully I'll have something by next year, early next year.
Oh, that's good. Because you already have a complete manuscript ready to go.
Ready to go,
That era, we're talking about the last prince of the Joseon Dynasty. It's a very unique era. How did you get interested in that era?
I think I'm always interested in sort of turbulent history and what happens when one era gives way to another. What happens to the people involved psychologically? What does it mean to a population of people who have had one kind of system for a very long time and then suddenly everything is shaken up?
Because Korea left behind the monarchy. Monarchy, the end of a monarchy, which is a very turbulent area, as you point out, has not really been on the forefront of the minds of Koreans for a long time. How did you pinpoint your interest in that area?
So it was sort of by chance. So when I was a journalist, I interviewed a man named Ishak. Now he is a very interesting character in himself.
He's the son of your
main
subject,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
Yeah. So he lived a very up and down, kind of tragic life mostly. He really, I think, represents a lot of the difficulty of Korean society in the 20th century.
비둘기처럼 다정한 사람들이라면 장미꽃 넝쿨 우거진 그런 집을 지어요.
And so I started to look into him a few years after that. I'd always had the idea in my mind, maybe I'll write a book about him one day. But then when I started to really dig into his life story, I thought, well, his dad is even more. So his father, Igang, Uchunwang. for me, as a character, he's very complicated because I think he grows up without a sense of, these are my parents. He can't really relate to people very well. And when you take somebody like that and you give him lots of money and privilege in his teenage years, I think it will do some strange things to a person, right? But then also later he's sent to America as a student. And he develops this sense of national identity or interest in the future of his country for the first time. But then he discovers a cause. A cause, a mission. So for me, it's that trajectory of a person who is trying to overcome something and trying to be better, having a target. So there's kind of a hero's journey aspect to it. And at the same time, I think within Korea, of course, there's people who are trying to modernize the country. There's people who are trying to oppose the Japanese encroachment. And sadly, ultimately, it doesn't work. And it's the same with his own life. So I feel there's a kind of not a complete mirror, but there's a reflection of sorts.
A parallel of sorts to what Korea was going through.
Yeah.
You talk about the people that he met in the U.S., but it's a historical novel, but you deal with actual real people. So how much of this is fiction? How much of it is history?
There's quite a mixture. I'd say most of the big events are true, but some are. I'm trying to think how I would say yasa in English. So they're kind of
the backstory.
Or kind of like unconfirmed history, or somebody says this, but somebody else says that didn't really happen. So there's a few events that I've included that are like that, because I just thought they would advance the narrative, or they would show something about this character that is in keeping with the character I've imagined.
The dramatization of events, maybe.
Yeah, and there are certain things and certain details I just make up, of course, because it's a novel.
Right? It's a novel,
And dialogue is obviously completely made up too. So a mixture of fact and fiction.
But that's always a difficult thing to do, especially when some of them or some of their children are still alive. And my grandmother definitely didn't say that.
Yeah, I really worried about this. So I was lucky enough to interview a lady named Lee-Kyung, and she's actually an American citizen now. She lives she's lived in the U.S. since the 1950s. So she's in her 90s now actually. But she is one of the last surviving children of the man himself. And so I was lucky enough to be able to get connected to her. So I had a couple of telephone interviews, like quite long interviews with her. And so she told me a lot of stuff about him. It was helpful talking to her. She would explain his psychology a little bit, or the fact that her birth mother is a different woman, not the princess. Right.
Mother.
She's the tragic character of the book in many ways. I learned a lot about her from Lee Hae-kyung.
You've had a lot of support and help from the real people in that era. Does being a non-Korean help you take this view of difficult era, or is it more difficult?
In a technical sense, it's more difficult because Korean is not my first language, and everything I do in Korean takes 5 or 10 times longer than it would take, I don't know, a Korean person, right? That's just inevitable. There's an element of maybe an outsider perspective, or if I'd grown up in Korea and experienced Korean historical education, then perhaps I wouldn't have been interested in this era at all. Perhaps I would have gone, those people were just a bunch of whatever.
We studied in our textbooks, and we didn't think it was that interesting.
Right.
To be honest with you,
Right. I think journalism also helps, though. That background of hearing something, that's interesting, and then if I connect it to that thing and that thing, then isn't there a story in there? And then how do I gather the information? So that was a very big help.
So it does give you a little bit of freedom, maybe, to maybe not be so...
Yeah, possibly.
I am, carrying on the tradition of Korea as a Korean type of thing. Have you gotten reaction for your book?
So nobody has said that they didn't like it, or you're wrong, or that's the wrong view of history. I mean, I've not had that. I've done a few interviews with Korean TV or press and whatever, and there's always 댓글, right? The comments underneath. On the critical side, there's been people who have just said, let's not look at these old royals because they were useless and they lost the country. And I mean, I understand that view, although I'm saying my main character is a bit different, and you know, look at him because he tried to do something. On the positive side, I think people appreciate the detail. There's a level of detail that I really try to get with this book. I mean, it's quite long, but also people will say it goes by very quickly. Like it's surprisingly readable for a book that's 600 pages long. Yeah, I mean, I've had people say they got lost in it. They just spent a whole day and they read the whole thing in one day and really liked it. Yeah. One that comes up is like a cinematic. It's filmable or that kind of feeling.
So I can sort of see a drama series coming out of this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would be lying if I said I wasn't hoping for that.
Yeah. So, you're no stranger to being a strange foreigner in Korea. I thought that the name of that book, The Geek in Korea, was very telling. So why do you consider yourself a geek in Korea, and how did you find yourself in Korea?
So A Geek in Korea, it was, actually the publisher suggested it and I thought it was quite funny, so I went with it. But yeah, I mean, I guess my interests here are very broad. I mean, I like all kinds of cultural aspects of Korea and history and just places, geography of Korea. I probably have a very broad, too broad even, list of interests.
How did you first come to Korea?
2002 World Cup.
Yes.
So
that was an exciting time to be in Korea.
Yeah, probably the best time in the history of Korea ever to be in Korea, maybe. It was
Especially
so much fun.
as an expat. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was just so much fun, and everyone's your brother or your sister, and yeah, my best friend at university, so I was a student at the time. Yeah, oh, would you like to go to the World Cup? Yeah, of course, yeah. I didn't know anything about Korea. I just had a friend who was Korean. So I just followed. After I graduated, I thought, I'll come back for a year. I taught English like many young Westerners did at that time. Did that for a year. Then I thought, do I want to go back or not? I don't know. And I stayed. I ended up working for an investment firm. And then stayed a couple more years. And after that, I kind of went back and forth. I did a master's degree back home. I worked in Switzerland for a while. I've not been continuously in Korea, but Korea, I think, is always somehow calling me back, like, grabbing me by the ankle. And yeah. So, and same now, I mean, I got married fairly recently. And before I met my wife, I was also thinking, I was thinking about leaving Korea at that point too. And then I met her and I ended up staying, and I think now I'm...
Yeah, you're hooked now.
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah.
You're done now. So, I mean, you know, and in the process, even though there were times where you were sort of in and out, but you wrote a couple of really interesting books about Koreans, very insightful. One of them, The Impossible Country. So why was Korea the impossible country?
Yeah, I wrote this book, Korea the Impossible Country, and the title comes from something an interviewee said to me. So this is a guy who was an advisor to President Park Chung-hee, talking about the development of Korea, the Korean economy. So obviously he, as a person who worked for Park Chung-hee, he's very positive about Park Chung-hee in that period. He will say, well, Korea was the poorest and most impossible country on the planet. Just getting over the Korean War, everything is, any bad thing you can imagine is probably true at that point. And so I took that word, but also I thought, well, if I interview younger people, they'll talk about Korea's impossibly high sort of competitive standards for getting a job, for education, all this kind of stuff. So I thought there's a double sort of use of the word impossible. I took that word to mean Korea is a country that's come from an impossible situation to achieve an impossible seeming miracle, really. But also, if you're a young person in Korea today, you still may feel life is impossible. So in good and bad ways, I felt.
Do you still find that double-edged, impossible country to be Korea?
I would say so, yeah. So right now I'm working on another book, which is about the low birth rate. So this isn't just a Korea topic. This is a worldwide topic now. But Korea happens to be the epicenter, right? So I'm interviewing a lot of young people here, people in their 20s who maybe consider that they could never have children because we need this amount of money and you need this kind of apartment, you need this kind of job, and if you don't have that, then you just can't have children. I mean, there's people who say things like that.
That subject is something that personally you also feel much more interest in now, but we'll get to that in a second.
Sure.
Before that, though, North Korea.
North Korea,
I mean,
yes.
when people think about Korea, they think about
impossible.
of course, the economic miracle, and these days, maybe the young. But traditionally, for a non-Korean audience, when people talk about Korea and something that is impossible, they think about North Korea.
Right.
Because you have been to North Korea.
Right.
I've written a book about North Korea.
Right.
What are your observations about North Korea?
So, I mean, I tend to view North Korea not just as, communist or... I think that's the general wrapping paper of North Korea, but I look on it as like a monarchy, like a continuation of old Joseon, but with nuclear weapons.
You were invited to go to North Korea?
Yeah. I gave a lecture at the Grand People's...
University.
Yeah, this hall, which is a very grand place in the center of Pyongyang. And I gave a lecture about marketing to North Korean
Oh, because you are an
servants,
Economist journalist.
Yeah, so the Economist correspondent, but also I'd been running a startup at that point. So
I see.
My lecture was about how to do marketing or PR for your company, even though you're small. Kind of my cover, I guess, was to do this lecture and then talk to those people afterwards. And so how does it work? If you want to start a business in North Korea, how do you do it? If you want to make money, how do you do it? How is the money divided? So talking to people about that, and I got to get some idea of North Korea's kind of semi-communist, semi-capitalist, very murky kind of economic system, how it works at that level. But then also we're able to go around a little bit, and I could see these illegal street markets. So how are poorer, ordinary people who are struggling to survive, how are they making a living? And so you can see actually that North Korea is not outwardly capitalist, but there's people doing capitalistic activity, selling and buying products, trading, making money to live. And so the book is about that, really. It's not really a general book about North Korea, but it's more how does the North Korean economy function?
Along that line, what would be your biggest insight about how North Korea functions?
I think that in the end, people are people. So young people in North Korea, as anywhere, may be interested in fashion, would like to have a mobile phone. I mean, I met talking to this young lady there who, she knew about Instagram and she said, I wish I could have Instagram, right? Well, she can't have Instagram, obviously, but she wished she could have Instagram. And people are interested in the outside world and they consume South Korean drama, music and so on, and then stuff from elsewhere too. We look at North Korea as this black box, or we look at it as a place where there's just Kim Jong-un and there's nuclear rockets or whatever. But so they look at the weirdness aspects and then the threatening aspects of it. But also there's 22 million people living there who are trying to just live and do ordinary things, and they fall in love, or they go to school, they work, and so on. And I think it's important to remember that it's a country with people in it
that are all trying to survive.
Under a very unpleasant system, unfortunately.
You're right. People do tend to forget that aspect of it. But switching to you at the moment, a father.
Yes.
Your daughter is 1 year old, like 12 months?
Yeah, exactly 12 months. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Name?
Aria.
Aria.
Yeah.
What a wonderful name.
Thank you.
And we have another one on the
another
way.
one on the way. Yeah. So
Yes.
trying to think of
Yeah,
names
trying to-
now.
yeah, oh, wow.
Yeah.
So how has that perspective? I mean, you talked about your current interest in the low birth rate.
Yeah.
Is it linked to your
It
current
is, yeah,
situation?
it definitely is, yeah. So I think it's something I was always aware of in an abstract sense. Like you read the news, well, Korea has a birth rate of 0.7
Yeah.
whatever, or even say my country now, it's a lot lower than it used to be.
But it's still higher than
Well,
Korea.
it's higher than Korea, yeah. Generally, in
Everyone's
the
sort of heading
in the
there.
rich world, everyone's going in this direction. Some are going faster than others, but everyone's going in that direction, it seems. So I'd read a lot of stories about this. So it's an interesting topic, but it doesn't really pierce into me, you know.
It doesn't hit you over the head.
Yeah.
Until now.
Yeah. And then we had a baby, and we'd take our baby out, we'd push her around in the trolley in our neighborhood, and old people would go, "Oh, Agaya, a baby," right? So that was quite shocking. Like, is it really that surprising to see a baby?
You know, people, when they do look at a carrier, they actually expect to see a dog.
Right. So you look at all this, this is a very interesting socio-economic topic, actually. And so as a journalist who likes writing about things like that, I want to get into this, actually.
So is it going to be like a study, like not a novel?
No,
nothing like that.
So it's going to be a journalistic type book, non-fiction, but not just Korea.
So far, with your research, mostly with Koreans at the moment, and your personal experience, what do you think is the main cause of such a low birth rate?
Right, I think there are several aspects. So it's a complicated thing. So it's hard to say, there's one thing that if we just do this, then we'll solve the problem. But I think there's a financial aspect, obviously. Housing is stupidly expensive, and work is less secure than in the past. So maybe you earn this much, that's fine, but will you earn this much next year? Now, previous generation, relatively stable career path in those days, and
you could sort of see where that future would be.
So children need, if you want to have kids, you need solidity, right?
Yeah.
So to plan ahead, and there's less ability to plan ahead now, I think. Also, there's a cultural change in all of the rich countries, which is somewhat sort of postmodern, or it's more focused on the self. I want to develop myself. I want to be this kind of person, and I don't necessarily need to have children to be a person in full. There's some kind of mentality change as well. So in the case of Korea, there's the very competitive educational system, which requires apparently a lot of spending, and so that increases the cost too. Again, this applies to Korea, but it applies to Hong Kong, it applies to Singapore, places where you have a very high urban concentration, where everyone's living in one massive city, then that actually produces less children.
It's not conducive to raising a family, really.
So if you go to the countryside, people do have more kids.
True, yeah. When is your goal for this book to be completed?
I think it'll take about a year. Maybe more even, I don't know. But
Well, I mean, after that book is completed, please come back and tell us what you found.
Thank you.
And see if you're able to solve this very, very important issue.
I'm not saying I can solve it. I'm just saying...
Well, lead us into the right direction.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, well...
Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And that's it for me. I'll be back next week with another globalist who's putting Korea on the map. Sun Ji, out.